Everything.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon. Hope you're well. Welcome to those who are with us in person, and welcome to those who are with us from long distance. It's good to have you. So I wanted to share because Purim is right around the corner. We know that tomorrow is Tanis Esther. I wanted to share with you some material on Megillas Esther that I came upon this year. I want to refresh your memory. This is a sefer I had bought last year. I didn't get it in time for Purim last year, and I remember making a mental note that I want to have time before Purim this year to look through it. This was the commentary on Megillas Esther. It's actually called Keren Yeshua, which means like the horn of salvation. Is like, sounding the shofar. So Keren Yeshua, it was the commentary on Megillas Esther. It was written by Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad. I've got a brief bio of him there, as well as a artist rendition of a picture of him that may have actually been based on an early photograph, because look at when he lived, photography was being developed at the end of his life. So it's entirely possible that that is based on an early photograph that was touched up. So this is Rabbi Yosef Chaim. He was the chief rabbi in Baghdad. It's so hard for us to imagine nowadays that Iraq once had a thriving Jewish community. But if you think about it, Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud Bavel, is modern day Iraq. So really, until the formation of the modern day state of Israel, there was a functioning and in fact sometimes thriving Jewish community that still existed in Bavel. So here it is in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they still had a thriving Jewish community in Baghdad. And Rabbi Yosef Chaim was the rabbi there. And Rabbi Yosef Chaim, he's best known for his halachic work, which is highly, highly regaled in the Sephardic world. It's called the Ben Ish Chai. So if anyone's ever heard of the Ben Ish Chai, that was the work that was written by Rabbi Yosef Chaim. So let's just see, there's a brief bio on him there. So you see when he lived from 1835 to 1909, and there's his name as Yosef Chaim mi Baghdad. He is the famous Rabbi Yosef Chaim living in Baghdad, was a leading Baghdadi Hacham. He was a leading Sephardic rabbi, authority on halacha, and a master Kabbalist as well. He is best known as the author of the work on halacha called Ben Ish Chai, a collection of laws of everyday life interspersed with mystical insight and customs addressed to the masses and arranged by the weekly Torah portion. So that's how most of us have heard of Rabbi Yosef Chaim, the Ben Ish Chai, based on that halachic work that he wrote. And again, in the Sephardic world, he's incredibly popular for that work. Now, as I said, I discovered that he wrote many Sfarim. One of them was this commentary on Megillas Esther. This is a copy that I got my hands on last year. I got so excited because it was done with a new typeface. Everything is a new typeface. It's beautiful, so it's easy, it's accessible, it's readable, and I wanted to access it. I've got my hands on it, so I want to share with you a couple of insights from Rabbi Yosef Chaim from the Ben Ish Chai on Megillas Esther. So let's start off in Perek Vav. We're all familiar with the basic story of Megillas Esther. We'll just do a brief recap of what's going on in Perek Vav. In chapter 6, this is the king, Achashverosh, still does not know the identity of Esther, the true identity of Esther, what nation she belongs to, who her people is. But at this point, Haman has already made a deal with Achashverosh, wherein Haman has the rights to annihilate the Jewish people. And the date has been set for the 13th of Adar in the coming year. Again, we're holding now the days right before Pesach, so it's in Nisan, the beginning of Nisan. That's when all the palace intrigue is going on. So this is all for a date that's going to take place about 13 months later. I'm sorry, 11 months later. That's when about this is going to happen. About 11 months later, that's when in Adar, when this annihilation day has been scheduled. And there's great panic within the Jewish community in Shushan and everywhere where this edict has reached. In the middle of all this, Esther has risked her life to ask Achashverosh to attend a party the coming day. And at this party will be Mordechai and Esther and Haman and the king, nobody else. And the king is having a hard time sleeping, just trying to wonder what's this all about. And that night, he's also having a hard time sleeping because it's bothering him he can't sleep. He asks one of his ministers to read for him from his Sefer Zichronos, his book of Chronicles. And in that book of Chronicles, he sees this incredible event that had happened earlier, wherein Mordechai had saved his life. He had gotten wind of an assassination attempt that was intending to knock off Achashverosh. He had informed on the people plotting this, Bigsan and Seresh. They were executed for their intentions, and the king had never repaid Mordechai. So it's bothering him that night that he can't sleep. Someone's reading him a Sefer Zechronos, and it bothers him. Oh my gosh, I never repaid him. And just at that moment, when he's wondering what I could do to repay him, that's when Haman shows up. And when Haman shows up, that's when the king asks him, Mr. Haman, tell me, what would you do for somebody who the king really wants to honor? And Haman's thinking, who could he possibly want to honor other than me? So he starts saying all of these things that would bestow honor on him. Put him on the king's horse, dress him up in the king's clothes, put the king's crown on him, and have a town crier go out in front of him, screaming, this is what happens to people who the king really wants to put honor upon. And Haman is thinking that, excellent, this is all setting up for me, because he wants covet, he wants glory, he wants honor. So he's thinking this is an excellent situation. And little does he know that the king really wants this all done to Mordechai. So this starts the downfall of Haman right here. So let's see, we're in Perek Vav, that's chapter 6. So let's see, it's Pasuk Yud. So it's verse 10. Vayomer HaMelech LaHaman. So after the king hears Haman's entire wish list of all the things that he would love to have come his way. So the king says to Haman, Maher, hurry up, kachas halavush v'sasus kasher dibarta, go fetch these royal garments and the royal horse, exactly like what you said, v'aseh kain, and do all that, leMordechai HaYehudi, for Mordechai the Jew, Hayoshev B'shar HaMelech, who has been sitting in sackcloth and ashes at the king's gate. That's who I want you to honor. Al tapel davar, and don't let anything fall to the wayside. Mikol asher dibarta. Everything that you just suggested, make sure to do the entire package, give that entire package over for Mordechai. That's what the king tells Haman. So let's take a look at what the Ben Ish Chai says here. I thought this was very interesting. He says, Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta. Don't let anything fall to the wayside from that which you've said. Why did the king feel the need that he has to order Haman to do this? Just say everything that was just suggested. That's what I want you to do for Mordechai. Let him just say that. Why does he need this expression of al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta? Don't let anything fall to the wayside of that which you just said. That seems extraneous. That seems to be extra. If he just said, do everything for Mordechai, why would he think that Haman would leave anything out? If Haman were to leave something out, he would have violated an edict from the king. And we know what happens to those who violate the edict from the kings. We know that they do not meet a good end. So he says as follows, Vinira lefaresh, it appears to explain as follows. Ki kavanaso lamar, what did Achashverosh, what did he intend to say? Ki hachruz asher tachriz lefanav. That announcement that the town crier is supposed to say in front of the horse that's being led, Kacha yeyaseh, so is to be done for anybody who the king really wants to favor. That whole speech that you said, Lo titen mergoa lenavshecha, so he says as follows. His suggestion is what he's getting at here is you're not allowed to take a break. Usually a town crier, when he goes out to make the announcements, okay, he makes the announcements, then he lets it quiet for a bit, continues walking with the procession on the next block, make another announcement. He says, no, that's what Achashverosh is telling Haman here. Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta. Don't let anything that you just suggested, the dibor, the speech that's supposed to be made, don't let it stop. It's got to be continuous. I want you to keep on crying, keep on crying, keep on crying, keep on with your announcement. And that's what he says here. Not the way things are ordinarily done, that the town crier will take a break and maybe announce it once per block. Here it's got to be absolutely continuous with no breaks. Shekol mahalech shloshim or arba'im ama, every 30 to 40 cubits, yachriz v'yishtok ben abenayim. Usually what happens is the town crier announces it, and after 30, 40 cubits, announces again, but he gives himself a break to recharge his batteries in between here. That's what normally happens. However, that's not what you're going to do. Achato lo tishtok ben abenayim. You, Haman, you are not going to take any break. Elatia holech v'korei kacha b'li hafsek. You're going to announce the whole march with Mordechai. You're going to announce kacha yasel ish Hashem melech v'chavetz b'karo over and over on a continuous loop with no breaks. That's what he's suggesting. What the king is saying here. Yan ki elu hem shlosha mine kavod b'im kechad. And now it'll come out that there's going to be three manners of kavod that Mordechai is going to receive simultaneously. Ha'echad, what's the first? Levush HaMelech. He's going to constantly be in the clothing of the king. Habez, what's the second form of kavod? Rochvo al sus HaMelech, that he's constantly riding on the king's horse. Gimel, what's the third piece of kavod that he's going to constantly be receiving? Bichruz hazeh, this announcement that Haman's going to constantly be screaming at the top of his lungs, Kacha yeyasel ish asher melech chafetz b'karo. So the king is telling him, Al tapel davar michol asher dibarta. I want it to be continuous. Everything that you just said is the way to honor someone. I want it, no breaks. I want it to be absolutely continuous. I want him to receive all three items that is covered simultaneous. Kikol ama ve'ama shel rachov, every cubit that he's walking in the street, over aleh, Mordechai b'levush HaMelech, he's going to always have the clothes on. U'v'sus HaMelech, he'll be on the king's horse. V'im tishtok, if you're going to be quiet, ben abenayim, in between announcements, shiur kama amos, for a number of cubits. Nimsa rov amos harachavos, hay Mordechai chaser mina kavod hashlishi. Then it's going to come out that the majority of the time that he's on the horse, he's missing out on that third aspect of kavod, which was hearing the town crier saying his thing. Shalachruz, of the announcement. Amar, that's what the king was telling. That's what Achashverosh was telling Haman. Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta. Don't give it a break. All the kavod that you just said for Mordechai, all the clothes, which includes the crown, riding on the horse, just like that's continuous. Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta. So too with the announcement. It's got to be on a continuous loop, no breaks whatsoever. Lo tachsar davar echad mina shlosha mina kavod asher dibarta. Don't let one of those three aspects of kavod that you spoke about, don't let any of them ever stop. It's got to be absolutely constant. Ulakach, as a result of this, as a result of this, it comes out that what was Haman doing? He had to constantly be screaming, constantly be using his vocal cords throughout every inch of every street of the city. O akavana, hakavod shu b'dibur shu akruz, or maybe what it means is al tapel davar michol asher dibarta. What it means is specifically the aspect of kavod, which has to do with dibur, has to do with speech, which is the announcement. Don't let that stop. Al tachasru. Don't let that be lacking. Mishnei kibudim shel merkava v'shel melavush. Don't let that be any less constant than what Mordechai is receiving the kavod from wearing the clothing and wearing and riding on the horse. Therefore, every amma, every step you're taking, as soon as you're done screaming that sentence of kacha yasel ish, make sure to scream it again. So the first thing that Ben Ish Chai did was interpret the pasuk. He said, that's pshat. That's what the pasuk means. Al tapel davar michol asher dibarta. I want it to be continuous. I want, just like the wearing the king's clothing is continuous kavod, just like riding the king's horse is continuous kavod. I want the announcement to be continuous kavod. The only way that could happen is if you're on a continuous loop. You're constantly repeating it. You're not giving yourself a break. It's not once per block. It's constant. As soon as you're done with the sentence, start it up again. That's how he's learning it. Now what the Ben Ish Chai is going to say in the next paragraph, if this is true, now we can explain a question that always bothered him about a certain very famous Gemara in Maseches Megillah that gives an in-between the lines story here in the Purim story. What was that? Uvizeh, now that we've established that that's what the king ordered Haman to do, Yuvan, it can all be understood, Hatam shetasa bito shel Haman. Now we can understand why Haman's daughter made such a terrible mistake. Let's pause for a second. The Gemara in Megillah tells us a beautiful, the Medrash also says this, but the Gemara really speaks it out in terms of telling us in between the lines, something happens in the Purim story here that's not found in the actual text. And that is as follows. After, and Rashi hints to this because he's quoting the Gemara, after this is all taking place, it says that Haman returns home, Avel v'chafoy rosh. He comes home in mourning, and with his chafoy rosh, his head is all covered. So what does that mean, Avel v'chafoy rosh? Rashi says, quoting the Gemara Megillah, he was an Avel, he was an Avelus. It didn't just mean he was in mourning because he was so humiliated. He was actually an Avelus. Why was he an Avelus? Because his daughter had just committed suicide. Why? Chafoy rosh, because his head was covered. What was his head covered with? Sewage or garbage, a chamber pot. Because the Gemara says as follows: when the daughter of Haman hears that there's someone leading someone on a horse through the streets of Shushan, screaming at the top of his lungs, this is what happens to someone that the king really wants to honor. And he sees someone being humiliated in this fashion and someone being honored. She immediately assumes, who's the one being humiliated? Mordechai, because she's raised in a house that hates Mordechai. And who's the one being honored, she thinks? Haman, her dad. So she goes up to the roof. She wants to take in the sight, but she also wants to further the humiliation of Mordechai. So the Gemara says she took a chamber pot in the house. This is the day before indoor plumbing. And she decides, I know how I'm going to dispose of this. I'm going to dump this on the crier as soon as he walks past our house. And sure enough, she does this. She dumps it on the crier, and the crier looks up and she sees, who did she just dump the sewage on? Her dad. And she's so humiliated and despondent, she leaps from the roof and she dies. So that's what it means that after this incident, Haman returns home, Avel. He's actually not just mourning because he's humiliated. He's an Avel. He's actually an Avelus, and he's Chafoy Rosh. His head is covered. Covered with what? Covered with the trash, covered with the sewage. That's what the Gemara says here. So back to the Ben Ish Chai. Now that we've said Haman had to be screaming nonstop, I can finally explain something about that Gemara that always bothered me, he says. Uvizeh yuvan. Now we can understand. Hatam sheta sabito shel Haman. Now we understand, how did Haman's daughter make such a mistake? V'chashva, and she honestly thought, she'avia hu haya harochev. She thought her father, she thought it was Haman who was riding on the horse. V'hamachriz, and the guy making announcements, haya Mordechai, that was Mordechai. Did they have the same exact voice? She couldn't tell her dad's voice. She couldn't tell the voice of Haman from the voice of Mordechai. He says, how does that make sense? Hadavari Palai says the matter is astonishing. She may now lo ro panem, even if she couldn't see their faces, whatever. They never made eye contact. She was so high up. She's all the way up on the roof. And they're down on the street. How did she not recognize the voice? If it's her dad screaming at the top of his lungs, how did she not recognize? Oh, that's my dad's voice. Here I was thinking it was Mordechai. That's my dad. Did they have the exact same voice? Very unlikely. So it was her dad doing the screaming. How did she not recognize Haman's voice? She knows his voice. She lives in the house. She hears him day in and day out. So Ben Ish Chai says, this is something about the Gemara I never understood. But now that we said that Achashverosh told Haman, you have to constantly scream, and it's on a loop over and over and over again. What happens to someone's voice when they're screaming at the top of their lungs over and over and over again? What happens to that voice? It's hoarse. They lose their voice. Do they sound like they normally do? Very unlikely. So he says, now it all makes sense. Anyone living in a house recognizes one another. Even if it's dark, it's at night, there's no lights on. Everyone recognizes one another's voice. Certainly a father and daughter recognize voices. So how did she not recognize who's doing the screaming? Now it all makes sense though. Now I understand why she never recognized her father's voice. I knew. What was the king's decree on Haman? Sheachriz b'kol gadol, that he has to scream at the top of his lungs. Kola de lo pasek, and with a voice that's never given a break. Argoa, even for a minute, Benasayim. It can never stop to rest, to take a drink. V'ayir Shushan Gedolah, and Shushan's the capital city. It's a large city. V'rchovasar Ruchim Gdolim. It's got very long, wide streets. Hine Vadai Kasher Halach B'shtayim V'shalosh Rechavos Mishar HaMelech Ve'elach. As soon as he's gone 2-3 blocks from the king's gate and on, Nichar Garano Shalaman, his throat surely was very sore. V'nishtana Kolo, and his voice begins to change. It doesn't sound like he normally does. Ki od lo nikar, and now his voice is not easily recognizable. She can't discern. She's up on the roof. She hears some madman screaming in some hoarse, pitched voice. That's not her dad's melodious voice that she's used to hearing. So she assumes, okay, that must be Mordechai. I know what my dad sounds like, and that's not him. So she assumes it's Mordechai. That's why she dumped the sewage. So he says, Keder kol adam asher nichar grono. After all, this is what happens to everybody who gets a sore throat. And if they're screaming too loud and with a lot of force, they strain their vocal cords. Umach maskein, and it was because of this. Lo hikiro so mina kol shuavia. That's why she could not recognize that very, very familiar voice. She couldn't recognize that that's her dad. V'shavcha alav gerav shalrei, and that's why she spilled on him the chamber pot, the pail that was filled with excrement. That's why she spilled the sewage, because she didn't recognize that voice, so she just assumed it was Mordechai. So I thought this was very cool what the Ben Ish Chai did here. He started off by saying, what's pshat in this pasuk? How do we interpret this pasuk? This verse doesn't seem to make sense. What's Achashverosh adding when he says, Al tapel davar mikol asher dibarta? Don't leave anything out from what you said. He could have just said, just do it all. Where was that? So he was specifically putting in this point. He was saying that I don't want you, just like those other forms of kavod, wearing all the king's stuff, his clothing, his crown, that's constant. Riding on the horse is constant. I want this last form to be constant too. The last idea of the kavod, of screaming kacha yeyaseh, I want that to be constant also. That means you've got to yell at the top of your lungs nonstop, keep going over and over again, never get a break. And he says, oh, that's great. Now that will explain that Gemara. How was it that the daughter didn't recognize? Because that voice was so shot. It was so terrible. She couldn't recognize it. He says, so I thought that was very, very nice. How he wanted to say pshat in a pasuk, and based on that pshat, he opened up a new understanding of. I'm sorry. He showed us how to understand that Gemara and answer a question that about the longest time. All right, we're going to continue now. On the bottom of page 2, this is very closely related because we've just mentioned that famous Gemara about the fact that Haman's daughter jumped off the roof and killed herself because she was so shocked about what she had done. So that's what the Gemara tells us there. We're going to see the Ben Ish Chai. He continues to work with this. I saw this last year, and this just knocked my socks off. What I'm going to share with you, this was incredible because it's real Purim Torah here. You'll sometimes hear that expression Purim Torah, that something's got a humorous bend to it. So here you're going to see this has a humorous bend to it, but it also is his way of learning the Megillah, which is such an out of the box way. Let's see this one. This is actually what inspired me to buy the Sefer. I saw this Divrei Torah first last year, and after this Divrei Torah, I said, my gosh, I got to see what else he's got to say. This one's going to knock your socks off. So let's see. This is a little bit later in that chapter. It says, after he comes home from that humiliation, it says, Vayisaper Haman le Zeresh Ishto. Vayisaper, like a sipur, means a story. So Vayisaper Haman leZeresh Ishto u'lechol avav es kol asher karo. He tells his wife Zeresh, and to everyone who loves him, he says over everything that has just happened. Vayomru lo chachma v'Zeresh Ishto, and his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, what do they say to him? Imizera Yudim Mordechai asher achilosel and polafanav. If this guy Mordechai is really one of the Hebrews, he's a member of the Jewish people, and you've already begun to fall before him, lo tuchalo, you're not going to win. Ki nafol tipol lefanav, you're going to continue to fall. That was the way their, stargazing and their understanding of things led them was, if he is Jewish and you have already started to stumble, it's just going to be one blunder after the next. Your goose is cooked. That's what they're telling him. Not a very reassuring visit home after that humiliating day. Odam dabrim mimo, and while they're still talking to him, Sirisei HaMelech higiu, so the officers of the king show up, Vayavhilu la'aviyas Haman, and they hurried him to bring him El Mishteh Asher Asusa Esther, to bring him to that first party that Esther had made. So this is everything is going wrong for him, and now he's being pushed out the door to go to this party. He doesn't have time to even get his wits about him. That's what the pasuk tells us. Now, the words that the Ben Ish Chai is going on are the first words of that pasuk. Vayisaper Haman l'zeresh ishto. Haman told over. He recounted the story, everything which had occurred. So let's go now to page 3, and it's going to begin where I have that finger. Vayisaper, the pointy finger. Vayisaper Haman l'zeresh ishto l'chol avav es kol asher karo. He told them over. So look at this, is astonishing. He says, Hine, goes, I want to tell you something that happened once. Hine beyom Purim, there was one Purim here in Baghdad, we were all celebrating, biyosenu misubim al shulchan, and we were having our Suda. There was a whole bunch of us, we were having our family Suda at Rav Yosef Chaim's home. There was one guy who was a little bit spiced. He was a little bit tipsy at our Suda, and he gave me the following challenge. He clapped on the table and he said to me as follows: Vamar li, Anochi mevakesh mimcha. Here's my request I have of you, Rabbi Yosef Chaim. Shetomar lanu eza chidush haletzuya. I want you to give us a chidush, a novel idea into the Megillah, which is comical. Like Leitzan means someone who's a jester. So he says, I want you to give us a novel insight into Megillah, which is comical. Begenuso shal Haman. I want you to give us a new way to knock Haman in a comical fashion. Aleza pasuk min psukei Megillah. That's his challenge. He throws out the gauntlet to the Ben Ish Chai. He says, I know you're a massive Talmud Chacham. I want you to use your scholarship in a humorous fashion. Give us a humorous way that we can find something that's pretty reprehensible about Haman, a new way to find something to hate Haman and to make him look bad and prove it to me from Psukim in the Megillah. That was the challenge this guest at his table threw down to him at this Purim Suda. So you can just imagine this. This is the scene and that he introduces it as follows. V'amarti lo, and he says, I'm going to record for posterity what was the humorous way that I knocked Haman from Megillas Esther. Here he goes. V'amarti lo, I said as follows. Hinei pasuk amer Megillah, the pasuk tells us, V'aman nidchaf el beso, that after that humiliating march through Shushan, Haman was pushed to his house. Avel v'chafoi rosh. He was in mourning and his head was covered. And then it immediately says after that, and he told over to his wife Zeresh and to all of his friends everything which has just happened. Top of the next column. And the Chazal, our sages tell us in the Medrash, and it's also in the Gemara, Avel, what did it mean that he was Avel in mourning? Albito, because of his daughter. She had died. V'chafoi rosh, and that his head was covered. Al mashikaro, because what had happened to him. And the Gemara expounds on that. The story that she had seen the horse and someone riding, she took the chamber pot, threw it on his head, and when she saw it was her dad, she jumped off the roof, committed suicide. That's what the Gemara tells us. Continues. The Gemara also tells us something else about Haman. Uviyado arba melachos. He had 4 skills. In his hands, he had 4 trades, 4 skills. Balan, it says that he was a balan, is a launderer, meaning he knew how to do laundry. Saper, he was also a barber, and because remember it said when he took Mordechai to take him first to the to put him on the horse, he had to give him a new set of clothes, and then he had to bathe him because he says he hasn't been bathed in a while, and he also had to give him a haircut, give him a trim because he's been in mourning, and it would be a chutzpah to the king to show up and wearing all this. So the Gemara goes on, and the Medrash goes on. There was much more humiliation that Haman experienced at this time there. And then it says the Golior. I forgot what that word means. I got to look that up again. Uchruz. A golior, I believe, is the one who's leading the horse, the one who's like the jockey, the one who's leading the horse. And uchruz is the town crier. In other words, in this experience that Haman went through, he went through 4 trades, you might say. Ayin Sham, and he says, look it up in the Medrash there, and he goes, now he's going to explain. V'hainu, let's speak this out. Avel, what does it mean that he was Avel al Bito, that he was mourning over his daughter? Ki yitila alav atzitz min agag. She threw the chamber pot on him from the roof. Ki chashva shu Mordechai, because she thought it was Mordechai. Ukishiraso she avia, when she saw that it was really her father, hipila atzma min agag, she threw herself from the roof and she died. That's what it means that he was an Avelus. Now it says Balan. What does it mean that he was a launderer? Kiyomer Rabbeinu, the sages tell us, Sham, this is the Gemara in Megillah, Kasher Bala al Bish Bigdei Malchus Mordechai, when he came to dress him in the royal clothes, Amar Le Mordechai says to him, Amar Le Mordechai, Matam Mevaze Malchus. How could you put me in the royal clothes now? That'll be an insult to the king. I haven't showered. I've been fasting for 3 days. Is Barnash Levusha Malchusa V'Osach? How can you put someone like myself who hasn't bathed? You can put me in the king's clothes, and I haven't been bathed, and I haven't been anointed with fine smelling perfumes. Azal boy Balana, he went looking for a launderer and a bathhouse attendant. V'lo ashkach, he couldn't find one. Timna osam Esther, because Esther had basically conspired with Mordechai to send them all home for the day. There was no one in the palace at that time who was a launderer and a bather. So therefore, what happens next? So it says Ma'avad. So what did Haman do? Asar chartzei va'al achsei. He basically filled the bathtub, and he had to give Mordechai a bath. What a big scrubber, scrubbing him down. So that's his first humiliation. Kivan denafik, when Mordechai gets out of the bath, Amar Leila Mordechai says to Mordechai, Sub, sit down, lavish hadin klila, and I'll put the king's clothes on for you. Amar Le, and then Mordechai says to him again, Ma'at mevaze malchusa. How could you do that and be so embarrassing to the kingdom? Is Barnash lavish klila demalchsav lo mispar? Have you ever heard of someone putting on the king's clothing and looking like a slob, not getting a good haircut and a trim of their beard? You got to give me a haircut. Azal boy sapar. So he went looking for a barber of lo eshkach. He couldn't find any. But he's got to get this done. The king's demanding that he gets moving here. So what does he do? Ma'avid. So what did he do? So he says, Ma'avid Hama, what I'm going to do? Azal lebese, he goes back to his house. Va'aise safra. He comes back with some scissors and barber supplies. The Yosef, and he has Mordechai sit down, become a sapra Mordechai. And he has to give now Mordechai a haircut. Hischal Haman lisanach, and Mordechai, and Haman starts to groan. He's like going, all these busha he's going through. Amar lo Mordechai, Mordechai says to him, Malach ha-mesanach, why are you kvetching? Amar lo, so Haman says to him, Oy lo, shehu sar gadol, v'nasa ata balan v'saper. He says, woe's to me. Look how I've been demoted. I was the second in charge, and now I'm a bathhouse attendant and a barber. He says, this is humiliating what I'm going through. Amar lo Mordechai. So Mordechai says to him, this is again all based on the Medrash and the Gemara. Amar lo Mordechai. Mordechai says to him, V'chi ani eni makir es avicha. Don't pull the shtick saying that you're some, highfalutin royalty, blue bud, and now you've been brought to be a menial worker. Do you really think I don't know who your dad was? Shaya Balan, your dad was a bathhouse attendant. Visaper, and he was also a barber, Bikfar, in a village called Corinus, in one of the Persian villages called Corinus. So don't give me this whole song and dance about how you're this royal prince and now you've been brought to such menial labor. You grew up in a house of blue-collar workers. Stop with this whole game. That's what Mordechai's rebuking him. And now you're just coming back to what it is, your family's trade. So stop with this kvetching. That's what Mordechai tells him. This is all brought down in the Medrash there. And that's what the Medrash also says, that what were the other two trades that Haman had at that time? Giliur uchruz. What does that mean? Perish Matnas Kuna. One of the commentaries in the Medrash explains, who's the name of the commentary is called the Matnas Kuna. What does he say? Giliur. What is a Giliur? Hedjot v'shafel. This is someone who's just a really low position on the totem pole. It was the Eved Haratz Lifnei Adonav. That's the servant who runs in front of the master, is called this Guliyar. So he's saying that he's now been put into that position as well, because he's the one leading the horse. Uchruz, what does it mean, the town crier? Shayamachriz, because he had to announce, Kacha Yeyasel Leish. So is done to the one who the king favors. Okay, the Ben Ish Chai continues on page 4. Nimtzo lefizeh. When you put all this Gemara and Medrash together, and just, what's the thread? What is the narrative that's just been sewn in between the lines of the Megillah? Kasher chazar Haman labeso. That means when Haman is returning home to his house, hechzer imo becheko, his daughter has just died, and what does he have with him? Because remember, he had to run home to get something. What did he run home to get? His barber supplies. So it means now when he's returning home, hechzer imo becheko, what does he have in his pocket? As hatzar, he has the razors and the scissors. Mordechai. All the tools he had to take from his house initially to give Mordechai a haircut when he's coming home despondent, mourning the loss of his daughter, with excrement on his head. He also has the tools of his trade. He's got the scissor and blades with him. Vine yadua. Now the Ben Ish Chai says it's well known. Ki ad ata, until this very day. In other words, he's writing this turn of the 20th century because he's again living in the 1800s, going into the 19s. He says it's well known until this day. Haminag hu etzel hagoyim shel anshe Kurdistan. It is well known that the practice amongst the non-Jews living in Kurdistan, the Kurds, these are neighbors of. Remember, he's in Iraq and Baghdad. You always heard about this, about how the Iraqis fighting with the Kurds. They're people who live right there. He goes, what's the minhag of the Kurds? Shim yamus lahem meis. When they suffer a loss and someone dies in the family, as kol hanashim akrovim, all of the ladies in that household, in that clan who are related, vo'avim, and the ones who really loved that one who died, him megalchim saros rosham b'shvil avelus. They shear their heads. That's what they do in the Kurds. He says, until this very day, this was the practice. That what did they do? When you lost a close loved one, they went for the buzz cut. That was how they demonstrated that they were in a state of mourning. So he says as follows, Bishvil Avelos, because of mourning. He says, Ume elu asairos, and from those hairs that they just cut off, nimtza b'makomos elu, that's what you'll find in our place here in Iraq, in Baghdad, peya nachris l'neshei Yisrael. That's where Jewish women get their wigs from. That's where Jewish women get their shaitels from. Because those women and all the relatives who had to cut their hair because of mourning, what are they going to do with their hair? May as well make a dime on it. So they sell that to the shaitel machers, and that's how Jewish women get the hair for their wigs. This is wild. It keeps going. Kimeviyam misham, they bring them from the Kurds, umochrim, and they sell them here in Baghdad. Why do those women in the Kurdish region, why do they shave their heads? Because of avelus. It's because of mourning. And that was the way going back to biblical times. That's what the Torah tells us by the Eishes Yifas Toar. V'gilchas Rosha is that her nation has been defeated in war against Am Yisrael. So what does that captive woman do? She cuts her hair off her head. Why? That's a form of mourning. Vainu l'simen avelos. That's to symbolize the fact she's in mourning. V'al kain. So now he ties it all together. Ka'asher mesa bito shel Haman. When Haman's daughter died, she committed suicide. She jumped off that roof. Muchrach shegam zeresh v'shar nashim oavav shel Haman megalchim es rosham. It makes sense that Zeresh, who's that girl's mother, and all the other women in that household, in Haman's household, who loved the daughter, they would all have to shave their heads. Therefore, kasher ba Haman lebeso, Haman now comes home from his humiliating day. V'hatar becheko, he's got the razor with him, and he has his scissors with him because he had to give Mordechai a haircut. Asher sipo Mordechai, oz siper gam es rosh zeresh ishto v'shar nashim shemo avov v'karvov shoy beso. He gave. Who did he give a haircut to next? His wife and all the women in the house. Again, what is a sapar? A sapar is a barber in modern Hebrew. When you see a barber shop, that's the sapar, that's the barber. So that's what he would have done. So it's convenient. He just came home from his humiliating day. He's got his scissors. He's got the tools of the trade. He says, I got bad news for you. They tell him, everyone says that the daughter of Haman's dead. So that means the wife and all the women, they're all in mourning. They have to shave their heads. So he says, therefore, therefore, he says, look, I just gave Mordechai a haircut. I have my razor. I have my scissors. We just found out the daughter's dead. They're all in mourning. So what did he do? Who did he give a haircut to next? Zeresh. He gave a haircut to his wife Zeresh. All the loved ones who were dear friends and relatives of the daughter, they all got this haircut as well. V'zeu shamar. That's what the pasuk might mean. We always read it pashup shot. The Haman nidchaf el beso avel v'chafar rosh. We always read it that again that Haman was pushed home. He was humiliated at a covered head. According to the Gemara in the Medrash, meant he was really in avelus. He was in avelus because his daughter died. He had his head covered with all the schmutz, with all the garbage that was on it. The kivan shenase avel, and now since he's an avel and his wife, the whole family's in avelus. Now the next pasuk makes vayisaper Haman. That what it doesn't mean that Haman told Zeresh everything. Vayisaper Haman means Haman what? Gave her a haircut. He shaved her head. That's what he says. Oz, that's what it means. Vaisaper Haman, bitar shayamuchan biyado, with the razor and the scissors, with the barber kit that he had in his hand. Vaisaper Haman lezeresh ishto, to his wife Zeresh, ulecholo avav, and to all the loved ones who were there in the house. Umefarish, and the pasuk says, lama siper lahem. Why did he give them this haircut? V'amar eskol asher karo, because it was based on everything which had just occurred. Ratzalomer, what does that mean? Bavor ha'avelus asher karo, because of this mourning which had just fallen on them. Ukvar oso hayom asa meleches tisporas leMordechai, and that very day he had taken on the task of giving a haircut to Mordechai. The atah, top of the next column, bod kli mnasa biyado, while he still has the tools of the trade in his hands. Also tasporas gam lezeresh. Now he had to give a haircut and shave that of his wife Zeresh, and to all the other women there who were close, either related or loved ones. So he says, aha, harei lecha, I've recorded for posterity. Drush halutzai. What was the comical drasha I came up with? B'psuke HaMegillah, that year at that Purim Suda. That Purim Suda that'll always be remembered in Baghdad. That Purim Suda where the Ben Ish Chai enthralled everyone about how he could instantly come up with a drasha that was which was a novel way to read the pasuk in the Megillah in such a way that could tie together midrashim, could tie together gemaras, could fit it in with the pasuk in a way that nobody's ever seen it before, in a joking fashion as well. That was the Purim feast to remember, the ultimate Baghdad Purim feast. He says, Begnus Haman, in a way to knock Haman, V'yismechu ha-mesubim b'zeh. And I got some good applause from the crowd. That's what he says. Everyone liked this one. But it happens to be, if you look back at the psukim, now let's just read it going back to the bottom of page 2. Now it all makes sense. Because look at the bottom of page 2. It's chapter 6. It's Perek Vav. That's Pasuk Yud Gimel. That's pasuk. That's verse 13. And again, the pasuk. What I don't have on the sheet. What's right before that? It says the Haman nidchaf el beso avel v'chafoi rosh. Haman returns to his house. Now he's pushed. He's rushed home. Avel, according to the Gemara, means he was in mourning because his daughter's dead. Chafoi rosh. He's covered with garbage. That whole story. Now vayisaper Haman lezeresh ishto ulechol abav. Vayisaper doesn't mean, according to this, that he told them. Vayisaper could also mean, and he shaved them. He gave them a haircut. He cut off all their hair, lezeresh ishto l'chol avav, to his wife Zeresh and to all the relatives, all the loved ones. Why? Es kol asher karo, based on everything which had just occurred, and based on the fact that was the practice, even going back to biblical times. What's fascinating again is that what the Ben Ish Chai, some of the historical nuggets he just let loose here, is that number one, he's giving you a window into what that festive Purim Suda looked like at his house that year, which must have just been a blast. But he's also telling you he was holding in the culture of the times. He knew what the Kurds were up to. He's living in Iraq and Baghdad. He's holding in the nature. This is the way. Everyone knew this is the way that the women in Baghdad, if they wanted to have a wig, this is where they were getting their hair from, because Kurdish women were selling their hair after shearing it because of the fact they figured if I had to cut it, may as well make a dime on it. That's how Jewish women of his time were wearing wigs. So we get another historical nugget out of here, that there were wigs in Baghdad at the time of it's not a modern day invention that Jewish women had a sheitel. This was something even going back then that they had. And look, I'm sure there was plenty who were wearing a mitpachat, were wearing some kind of other head covering other than a wig, but it's just seeing here that they existed. And then he's postulating is that this wasn't new to the Kurds. This could have been very common in the Near East, call it in the Middle East, whatever you want to say, in that region of the world. That was the way people expressed themselves when they were in a state of mourning. And he brings a proof to this from the case of Yifas Toar, that it says there, V'gilchas Rosha, she's supposed to shave her head. That's a form of mourning. We know that the Torah admonishes us not to yank our hair out, that we shouldn't make korcha, person shouldn't make themselves bald over when they lose a mace. I mean, yanking their hair out, that's not the way we express our avelos. That we know the Torah says this. So there definitely was something in the culture, going back to biblical times, that was the way that people were expressing their state of mourning. I thought this was absolutely fascinating. But again, what the Ben Ish Chai did here was that he says this is a very novel way to read these psukim. It weaves together all those in-between the lines stories that can be found in the Gemara and in the Medrash about what really happened on that fateful day to Haman. And it's a very creative way to read this pasuk. I know after seeing this, I don't think I'll ever look at that pasuk the same that I looked at it before. I hope this is something that could enhance everyone's Purim, give everyone a new appreciation for the Megillah, and if nothing else, give us a new something to twinkle at when we're listening to the Megillas Esther this year. And you get in Perek Vav, you get to pasuk Yud Gimel, and you hear Vayisaper Aman Lazeresh Ishto. Don't just think of him telling this over, but think of that, for all the caricatures that are out there of what this wife of Haman Zeresh must have looked like. Now imagine her looking bald like a plucked chicken. That's something else, another image that'll be in our minds.
That was very interesting, really.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Nahari. I'm glad you enjoyed.
All right.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Wait after recording.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I heard
I'm just shutting the recording.
Yeah, sure.
And then